Test 1, 2, 3. Greetings, authors, poets, playwrights, and so on. Today I'm going to do what I promised a lot of people I'd never do. I'm gonna become a teacher. The topic of the day is research, and research is super important to writing. When you are a writer, you're not just a writer. You are also, mentally speaking at least, a chemist, a police officer, an immigrant sometimes. Mentally. Remember I mentioned that. I mentioned in my last video about ethnic names. And ethnic names, I encourage ethnic names. I encourage ethnically diverse characters, as well as diverse characters in terms of gender, religion, sexuality, and so on. But that comes with a responsibility, because if you're going to write diversely, you have to do it right. There's no half-assing it here, okay? So I'm going to tell you what 1,000 teachers have told you that I'm sure you're sick of hearing, and that is don't use Wikipedia. I know Wikipedia is not as unreliable as a lot of teachers paint it to be, but it's still not the best source. There are cases you can use it. I've used it to figure out who performed at Live Aid in 1985. That's fine. Because that's not a huge deal. But when it comes to other cultures, religions, countries, ethnic backgrounds, languages, well, don't use Google Translate either. If you have a character that speaks another language, don't use Google Translate. I hate to tell you this, you have to find a native speaker. You have to find a native speaker, because another thing is if you want it to be believable to someone who speaks the language, slang is sometimes going to come into play, and even Duolingo and Rosetta Stone, they don't get into slang and stuff. You just have to find someone who speaks the language, which I realize is really hard, but we have the internet and chat rooms. You gotta be able to find someone on Tumblr or something who does speak the language, or I'm sure you probably know someone, you don't even realize it, who speaks the language. The other thing is Google Scholar. Okay? Google Scholar, you can find old police files on there, you can find first-hand sources that have been scanned and uploaded onto the internet. They're all verified and 100% accurate. You can trust them with your life. You've probably worked with Google Scholar before if you've ever written an essay in America in high school or in college. Teachers like you to use Google Scholar, and that's because it's trustworthy. The only website I like to use that's not Google Scholar in this case is called RetroWaste. It's for decades of the 21st century, and it comes from a very civilian point of view. The kind of people your parents or you would have been had you lived in that decade. If you're writing about the 80s, I'm going to be honest, if you're around my age, your parents were probably alive in the 80s, you could just ask them. You have it right there, it's easy. Another important thing is location. You do have to research your location quite a bit if you're not capable of going there. I've done a lot of research on Liverpool for a story that I write that's on my writing blog. I'm sure it's quite inconsistent because when I started writing it 2 years ago, I was not as good of a writer as I am now. I can tell you that. That's cringeworthy. It's really hard to get research on real places in like the modern day sense, because everything you're going to read is going to sound like an encyclopedia. So again, it's good to chat with people from there. If you can't do that, it's okay to make up towns. It is, because you want it to come from the heart. You want to hear not about the factual crap about the place. People like to read about the secret things that only locals know about. You can always, I suppose you can look up hidden gems of New York or something. I've done that for stories, which is quite helpful at times. But you don't want to, drop my stone, you don't want to write solely factually when your character is from that place. So that's the one thing where I want to say lean away from the research to avoid sounding very encyclopedia-esque, Wikipedia-esque, whatever. But everything else, research is insanely important, okay? When it comes to chemistry, make sure you know your chemistry, because if you're telling people, that can actually be dangerous. If you're doing chemistry and you're telling people, I don't know, that if you mix sodium chloride with this thing and it creates this chemical reaction, but if you're completely wrong about it, you might have just told people that this really toxic mixture is safe to create. People rely on information books quite a lot in fictional books, more than they think they do. I'm sure you've done it. Obviously, we know to dismiss stuff from Harry Potter, like spell names and so on and stuff like that, but people do tend to take those things to heart. And with cultures, it can create these unnecessary barriers between people of different cultures, and that's just really dumb and unfair. And sometimes, yes, it can be dangerous. So that is the importance of research. I encourage you to do your research when writing. If you aren't willing to research it, don't write about it. It's that simple. I myself have been doing actually quite minimal research for this project, as they're imaginary friends. Like, yes, they're fairies, and I can always do research on fairy lore, but it's a 6-year-old. So that plays into it quite a bit, the ridiculousness of this 6-year-old's imaginary friend who is a fairy being the 6-year-old version of a fairy, not the real life version of a fairy. I realize I just said real life version of a fairy, which, I think fairies might be out there, but I realize a lot of you probably aren't on that same page with me. I'm gonna leave on that note. I believe in fairies. I don't trust them 100%. You shouldn't either. And I know that from research. So do your research.